If not for the Memphis Grizzlies, the New Orleans Pelicans would have easily been the biggest surprise out of the Western Conference last year. And what was seen at the beginning of the season as a lost year at best or a complete dumpster fire at worst, given the loss of Zion Williamson for the season, ended as one of the most feel good stories in the league and one of the most promising young rosters in the league. The Pelicans started at 1-12 to begin the year, and it looked like they were going to have to trade an unhappy once in a generation prospect in Zion Williamson. But Willie Green became one of the most likable coaches in the league, and he got the ship turned around. Eventually, they made the play in and gave the Suns all they could handle in the first round. And I might owe GM David Griffin an apology. I have been very critical of him, but in my defense, sort of like my criticisms for Doc Rivers, it has a lot more to do with the way that the media treats him than anything he does in his capacity as GM. He isn't a total disaster, but he's far from one of the best GMs in the sport, despite what ESPN may be trying to convince you of. There have been some really bad moves since he got here in New Orleans, like trading Drew Holiday for a bunch of Bucks picks, basically just banking on Giannis leaving, and then going 1 year later, completely changing his mind and not wanting to rebuild anymore and spending those picks to get out of bad decisions he made, or more recently using sign in trades and spending picks to basically go from Lonzo Ball to Devontae Graham. But on the flip side, there's been a lot of really shrewd moves here. He got a king's ransom for Anthony Davis, which will still be paying dividends for years to come. He was able to acquire CJ McCollum at this year's trade deadline for basically nothing. And he found a lot of hidden gems, guys like Herb Jones, Jose Alvarado, and Trey Murphy. So as far as apologies goes, on my part, that one was pretty half-hearted, but I think with respect to at least last season, I don't think anyone could tell you any differently. David Griffin did a stellar job last year, especially considering the dark cloud that was the whole Zion situation kind of looming overhead. So now with potentially the most physically dominating player in the league returning and a super young, exciting roster with another year of growth under their belt, the Pelicans are primed to take a huge step forward this season. Vegas seems to agree. They're projecting them at 44.5 wins after winning just 36 games last year. And this is 100% without a doubt an over for me. And if it makes you feel any better as a betting person, I would have likely leaned towards taking the over, even if Zion wasn't coming back. As I mentioned, it was just a disaster of a start for this team. So that is what has more to do with their record than anything. The team was 13-10 post All-Star break last year and had one of the most potent offenses in the league. They were top 10 in offensive rating. And at that pace, that would put them as just hitting the over for this season. And that isn't factoring in any of the growth of young players if everything just kind of stays stagnant, or that isn't factoring in any of the growth of young players, just kind of everything staying stagnant, or the fact that they added the eighth pick in the draft, a 6'6" defensive combo guard in Dyson Daniels. And oh, yeah, they get Zion Williamson back. And I think people have sort of forgotten about him a little bit, just how dominant he was. And he was just pretty much unstoppable in that second season. He put up 27 a game on 61% shooting. And we really haven't seen that level of efficiency on that scoring volume. And just to add a little context to that, in Shaq's most dominant years, he never cracked 60% field goals on that level of production. So if that's the version of Zion that they're getting, look out. But if you're betting on this team to hit the over, you can still feel safe knowing that last year's Zion-less version of this team would have likely still hit the over this season. As for the team's aspirations, I think fringe playoffs, like kind of flirting with that sixth seed, probably a high seeding in the play-in, though. I do expect them to get out of the play-in. Obviously, that would be a trip to the first round. Maybe make it out of that first round if they get the right matchup. And this is all setting aside the fact that this team is as primed to make a huge trade as any in the league, or just making some minor adjustments, some minor upgrades. They have a ton of flexibility. They have just coffers full of draft picks, young players, and tradable contracts like Jonas Valanciunas, Devontae Graham, and Larry Nance, all of whom's deals can be kind of cobbled together to trade for a star player with all those picks and young players, or you could just do one for one swaps to kind of add depth or players who might fit the roster better. Combine that with a hopefully healthy generational talent in Zion Williamson, Brandon Ingram entering his prime, and then guys like Alvarado, Murphy, and Herb Jones who are entering their second years and adding Dyson Daniels to that really young core. Even with CJ McCollum's best basketball behind him, he's still got a lot of good basketball ahead. The future is just looking brighter than ever in New Orleans. And if they can keep the core together, they could absolutely be a contender sooner rather than later.